make it live are able to watch it later. So that is being recorded, and I will go ahead and share my screen so that you guys can see my slides. Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Okay, so thank you for taking the time to join us in this month's webinar. We wanted to take the time to inform you about some policies regarding HIPAA and these monthly webinars that has been provided by our legal counsel here at Giv.care, Wade Kelson. I actually am going to hang on for 1 second. I'm going to turn off my camera so it's not as distracting when I present. Sorry about that. Okay. So our HIPAA notification says, thank you for attending this live webinar. We value your attendance and participation as we address various topics for both presentation and discussion. We want this experience to be a safe place for you. We recognize that during the course of this webinar, participants may share information that may be protected by the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, commonly known as HIPAA. Please know that the policy of Giv.care is to exercise the highest level of compliance with applicable standards of HIPAA. Notwithstanding our policy, please know that for the purposes of this webinar, Giv.care requests that all participants refrain from disclosing any HIPAA protected information. We understand that only you can determine whether your shared information is HIPAA protected. Consequently, we affirm that Giv.care shall not be liable for any disclosure of HIPAA protected information made by a participant during this webinar. Should you feel that you must disclose HIPAA protected information during the course of the webinar, please don't. Rather, please exit the webinar and disclose said information to only authorized parties, not Giv.care. We reserve the right to ask any participants who may violate HIPAA standards to exit the webinar. We feel strongly to protect the rights of persons with disabilities, including rights of privacy and confidentiality. What this is basically asking is that we understand that during the Q&A portions of the webinar, you guys might ask specific questions to your situation, which we totally support. We just ask that when you do so to not name the names of any clients within Giv.care or their diagnoses or any protected medical information. This month, we wanted to continue the conversation around caregiver compensation, as we know this has a direct impact on many of our families within Giv.care. We wanted to share the latest news that we have from the state of Utah, what this means for DSPD as we understand it, and how that impacts families we work with who are using caregiver compensation within the Giv.care model. We will also be sharing action items that you can take to have your voices known to the right people who will be making these decisions that may impact your family. This is the information as we understand it. I will go through our presentation where we simply state how we're understanding this from our viewpoint. If you are on the call and know additional information that we have not covered or we understood something incorrectly, please feel free to share that information with us after I move through these slides, and we can open this up to a group discussion after the presentation. In the 2023 general session of the state legislature, the following was decided for SB 106, which is defined as the Caregiver Compensation Amendments. It states, before July 2023, the department shall apply with CMS for an amendment to an existing home and community-based services waiver to implement a program to offer reimbursement to an individual who provides personal care services that constitute extraordinary care to an waiver enrollee to whom the individual is a parent or guardian. If CMS approves the amendments described in subsection 5, the department shall implement the program described in subsection 5. The following sums of money are appropriated for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023 and ending June 30th, 2024. These are additions to the amounts previously appropriated for fiscal year 2024. The legislator intends that the Department of Health and Human Services use up to $1.7 million beginning non-lapsing balance from the long-term services and support line item in fiscal year 2024 to help fund the state costs of SB 106 caregiver compensation amendments. What this means in normal language is that the state had to make a decision about caregiver compensation before July 2023. They have decided to continue funding caregiver compensation through June 31st, 2024, and they have awarded $1.7 million to continue funding caregiver compensation. Our understanding of this information is that the state has provided the necessary funds for the continuation of caregiver compensation through June 2024 fiscal year. It is also our understanding that DSPD now has to decide how they allocate those funds. We see that there are three possible choices that DSPD could make. Keep caregiver compensation as it currently exists. Parents have the option to choose between a fiscal agent or a provider agency to help the family facilitate caregiver compensation. Two, DSPD argues that caregiver compensation cannot be tracked within an agency model because it is all billed as SLN and doesn't have a built-in distinction between traditional caregivers and parent caregivers. Although this is data we collect and can give to DSPD at any time, it is not data that they have access to without asking for it. DSPD could make a code specific for provider agencies to use when billing for caregiver compensation that would allow them to track that necessary information that they want on their end. The third option is that DSPD can say they no longer want to have provider agencies such as Giv.care providing caregiver compensation anymore and make it something that is only available to individuals who work with a fiscal agent. What this means for Giv.care. The current legislation that we have for caregiver compensation goes through June 2023. Before then, DSPD will have to decide which option they are going to choose for the continuation of caregiver compensation for the next fiscal year. If they choose one of the first two options, this will have minimal impact on the families using caregiver compensation within Giv.care. The worst case in the first two options is that they may decide to pay us less per quarter unit bill to them, which means that caregivers would make similar pay that would be available to them in the fiscal agent model. The overall worst case scenario would be if DSPD chose to remove caregiver compensation from all provider agencies. In this case, we would not be able to continue paying parent caregivers for the care they are providing for their child in services, and parents would have to move to a fiscal agent to continue using this benefit. If that happens, all individuals using caregiver compensation will have a grace period of sometime between August and December that isn't super clear to us at this point, but they will be able to transfer from Giv.care to a fiscal agent or find new caregivers to work with their loved one and continue using Giv.care with those new caregivers on their team. We do have a list of caregivers who have expressed interest in working with more families. If you email support@Giv.care, we can email you the contact information for those caregivers in your area, and you can make contact with them to see if they would be a good fit for you and your loved one to work with. Change does not come without action. Oftentimes, we're called to be the change we want to see in the world. If you have a strong opinion about caregiver compensation and have a preference to how you would like to see this carried out in the future, make your voice known and heard to the individuals within DSPD responsible for making these decisions. Caregiver compensation continue. Those efforts were heard, and now we have one final push. We encourage everyone to DSPD and tell them what caregiver compensation means for you and your family, the ways that it's benefited your family, and how using a provider such as Giv.care has made using these benefits easier for you and your family. We will send a letter template tomorrow following these calls to give you an example of the letter you could send. We encourage you to make the letter your own, use your names, stories, experiences, and what it means for you to be able to continue using these services with Giv.care. This is a super simple action that everyone can take, and your voices truly do make a difference. These are the best emails to send these letters to. We will share this information in our follow-up email as well. Jamie and Angie are some of the key decision makers within DSPD, and the info box will help these letters be seen by many individuals as well. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. We've been so grateful to be able to participate in caregiver compensation with our clients, caregivers, and support coordinators over the last year, and we know the benefits and impacts that it's had in your lives. We want to work alongside you so that you can continue using these benefits with Giv.care. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us anytime at support@Giv.care. We now want to open the floor to all of you to ask questions, provide feedback, or maybe additional clarification to anything we've said in this webinar. We don't want to be the master voice where we speak from the place of knowing everything. We know caregiver compensation touches everyone within this industry, and so we're more than willing to learn from anyone else on this call. if there are details we're missing. So please use the raise your hand function or place questions in the chat, and we will turn the time over to you guys. Yeah, Jen.
Yeah, Paige, I know that was a lot of information and a lot packed into just a short time. Are you able to just kind of give like a summary, like a recap of everything, kind of the main points that we wanted to share today?
Yeah, perfect. So basically, the state has decided to continue funding caregiver compensation. As we understand it, they've given budget for that through June 2024. So we don't know if they plan on adding budget to it every single year moving forward, but we do know that we have at least another year through June 2024. The state will have to make a decision, most DSPD specifically, about how those funds are used. So they could decide that agencies such as Giv.care or any other agency within the state, they could decide that they do not want agencies providing caregiver compensation anymore. If that were to happen, all of you who are currently using caregiver compensation, you would have to move to a fiscal agent such as Morningstar or Acumen or Valentine or any of those other fiscal agents to use that caregiver compensation benefit. So what we're asking is that if you guys feel passionately that using caregiver compensation with provider model like Giv.care has benefited your family, we encourage you to write letters to those key decision makers at DSPD to let them know how this has benefited your family and to continue that push to keep those services with Giv.care if that's something that you're interested in continuing.
Thank you, Paige. That was awesome.
Yeah, Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just also add before anyone else has any questions to chime in that a thing to point out, I mean, I really want to iterate that we'll give you the email that we're going to send tomorrow, but not just to send that, to really add your personal touch to it so they can see how it directly impacts you guys. If you've had experience working with a fiscal agent, that's even more awesome to directly explain the differences between the two and how one has worked better than the other or vice versa would be really helpful. Additionally, what we keep iterating to the state any chance that we get, but also would be beneficial for you guys to share as well, is we still have that tracking internally. If your support coordinator or transitional worker or coming up on an RFS, new budget, et cetera, has any pushback due to the tracking and tracing that they do with the caregiver compensation under a fiscal model, we have all those tools readily available to track. And so we just want you guys to know that that information is available when requested.
Perfect. Thanks, Anna. Did anyone specifically have any questions or anything that we've gone over today? Yeah, Natalie.
Could you just describe what is the difference between Giv.care and a fiscal agent?
Sure. So a fiscal agent, they basically just manage the payroll for caregivers and parents who are using caregiver compensation. So a family would fill out a paper timesheet. They would manage the HR and the hiring and all of the things that we do as Giv.care as far as like background checks and CPR certifications and all of those things. Those responsibilities fall to the parents within a fiscal agent model. And so the fiscal agent bills the state at a lower rate than we do as an agency because they're not doing as much of the work and a lot of that work is put onto the parents. With Giv.care, because we manage the hiring of the caregivers, the enrollment of the client, we manage the training of the caregivers with the CPR certification, the background checks, the fingerprinting, we cover the cost for all of those things. Because of that, we're seen as a provider agency. And so we're able to bill the state at a higher rate than a fiscal agent is. So those are kind of the key differences, is that we kind of alleviate some of that work off of the parents so that they just have to worry about scheduling shifts and managing their caregivers to come see them. Hillary.
I was wondering, can you send out an email list of the DSPD people that would be the best to send a letter to?
Yep. So we share those at the end of the PowerPoint slide. So you'll see that in the recording tomorrow, and we will send that in a follow-up email as well, along with kind of that letter template that we had mentioned.
Okay.
Deanna.
Hi, Paige. So question, and I think one thing to emphasize too with the difference between Give.care and a regular fiscal agent is due to the higher rate, you have to cut hours, right? Like, so you don't get as many hours. And so is that a way that they compensate? Because you're not, the state's not paying you to do as many hours. You don't, because you get your hours cut because Give.care charges the state a little bit more, right? So that kind of evens that out, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to pass that to Jen to kind of provide more clarification because I feel like she'll just do a better job of explaining that than me.
Okay.
Sure, and I'll let any of my coworkers jump in if they have more to add. But yeah, so how it works is depending on if you're a provider or if you're a fiscal agent, the state sets specific rates. And so the rate for a provider, like Paige mentioned, is going to be a little bit higher per billing code. And then for a fiscal agent would be a little bit lower because they have less hands-on work. And so how it works right now, if you're doing caregiver compensation in the state currently, what they'll do automatically is convert your budget to SL3, which is a fiscal agent billing code, and then they translate that into an SLN code if you move over to a provider. And so your hours will be fewer because the billing rate is higher with a provider. So you're right in the fact that you may lose a few hours from your budget. A lot of feedback that we've received is that the fewer hours work out okay because we pay a higher rate to our caregivers, as well as we do a little additional help. And so it's a little easier process for parents, guardians, clients, caregivers to manage. So that's kind of how it works out. And I'll let Anna jump in if she has anything to add here.
I don't have anything additional to add. That was a great recap, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, it's not an apples to apples comparison where if we say you have 40 hours of caregiver compensation, that means 37.5 hours within a supported living SLN code. So unfortunately, it's just, it's case by case, and we know there's a reduction, but there's not a formula to that reduction. So it's just based on what is submitted upon the RFS, which is that request for service of changing the SL3 caregiver compensation code to SLN supported living. Sorry, Paige, I'll just jump in on this question that was put in the message too, and then throw it back to you. Jory, that's a great note. So that caregiver compensation ends in 2024, but the legislation was for permanency. And that is 100% correct. So the legislation passed that caregiver compensation is now fully legal, not just under the COVID emergency funds, but the legislation and DSPD work as two separate entities. So if you were to see DSPD as another legislation that needs to be pushed through, that's where we're at right now. We don't know what DSPD is going to choose for how to honor caregiver compensation moving forward. So it is a law, but that law is now able to be interpreted by DSPD, and they could keep it with fiscal only. They could keep it with provider only. They could keep it with both. We just don't know. So that's why we're here to explain what we can.
So yeah, to answer Shailene's question in the chat, it's the funding part that isn't permanent. And so the legislation that I had read off during the presentation, as we're understanding it, that legislation only specifically spoke to the appropriation of funds through fiscal year 2024. I'm sure that if this is a permanent thing that they will continue to add funds each fiscal year, but the information that we have right now is only based off of fiscal year 2024 that we're currently looking at. So that's just as we're understanding it. If someone else knows more, that's just based off of like the little blurb of legislation that the state had sent out a month or so ago. Deanna.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I guess I just understood it because I was involved in the whole sending emails and everything to our senators and representatives to keep caregiver compensation. And there's someone that was kind of overseeing that, sending updates and things, and had just heard that it was permanent. So I guess I just didn't think, because I thought DSPD was on board with it becoming permanent. So I didn't think that there was a discrepancy there, that they weren't going to continue to fund it. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. I thought that, yeah, they were hoping for that too. So I guess I'm just, I guess I'm hoping it's a no-brainer that they're just going to keep it, like that we're not going to have to worry about that. So I guess what I worry about as a parent is, do we send emails to DSPD and those in charge saying, can we keep this, please? Caregiver after 2024, is that something potentially that we need to be doing?
As far as like an annual basis, I wouldn't assume that it's something that would need to be rehashed year after year after year. I think right now we're just really hoping to make our voices known to DSPD while they're in this situation right now where they're trying to make a decision of how they're going to make this permanent. And then our hope is that once they make their final decision come June, that this will be a sleeping baby that we don't have to poke anymore. But yes, Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick and then I'll turn it over to Kim. So essentially, and just to give you a little context on where DSPD is coming from, because right, a lot of us in the industry are saying no brainer, of course, like why wouldn't we continue this? When Caregiver Comp was approved, it was approved only for fiscal agent billing codes. And so they've allowed providers to service caregiver compensation, but they don't have a unique code for providers to use. So DSPD is in a position where they're saying, hey, originally caregiver compensation was only intended for fiscal agents. So now they're at a point where they have to make a decision. Do they create a new code for this? If so, that takes time and a lot of organization. And then, how do they want to move forward with it? And so a lot of the questions in the air, right, to us seem like, well, of course, but DSPD is in a place right now where they're just trying to figure out the details so that if it is an ongoing permanent thing, they have a way to track it and to support it along with all the other codes that they've previously created. And so it's just kind of a newer code. And because I don't think they anticipated that it would probably be around forever, and now there's, potential that it will be, they're just making some big decisions there. So just wanted to throw that in, and I'll let Kim ask her question.
So basically, our plea to DSPD is to reiterate how beneficial this has been for us to have this caregiver compensation, but also to let them know how convenient your apps are to be able to make our shifts with our caregivers and be able to clock in and clock out and make our notes, because I think that's amazing. I don't know what it is like to be with a fiscal agent, but I don't want to do any timesheets, that's for sure. So, right?
Yes, that is the exact thing that we would love for you guys to share with DSPD. As a full disclaimer, I'm also a parent of a child with a disability, but we're on a different Medicaid waiver that can only use a fiscal agent. And the getting started paperwork is like this thick. And it's been so overwhelming that we've literally been on our waiver for 3 years and I still haven't done it. Meanwhile, my job is to encourage people like you guys to use your benefits. And I'm not even using mine because I'm so overwhelmed by the fiscal agent model. So yeah, as a parent, I can just tell you guys that you have the better end of the deal currently, and you should want to keep using it.
For sure.
Amanda, did you have a question?
I was just hoping that someone could explain to parents that may have not used the fiscal model. There's also yearly paperwork and things that you have to do besides doing the timesheet and the intake and hiring and all of that. Isn't there reports yearly that are required that you would have to do on your own as well?
Because I've never used mine, I'm not sure, but I'm going to hope that either Kim or Lori has an idea of what that looks like with their hands raised.
Sorry, I didn't take mine off.
Oh, you're good. Lori, did you have a comment for that?
I do. You have to keep track of all of that. We started out with Valentine when they were very first starting out, and it wasn't bad other than trying to get all the paperwork in. Then they started changing all of the emails you had to turn everything into. Then they started changing the phone number you had to go through, because they took on all the clients from another accountant, basically, is what we'll call them. And then, yes, you can turn that in, but then they started changing your pay dates. And then they wanted you to wait, or your people to wait a whole month to get paid, because they have so many people. And our worker had suggested the Giv.care app because she says, this would change your life. And I was like, oh, good, because I'm really tired of fighting with someone. I'm really tired of having to call in and you get somebody else. And they're like, oh, well, you didn't do this or you didn't do this. And I'm like, yes, I did. I've gone by all your rules. You guys keep changing the rules as you go. And it isn't quite right. They have so many people that they are trying to cover. I don't think they really figured out exactly what they would be doing when they did so. But it made it so that the parents that were trying to pay their people under them and the people would have to wait. And they're like, well, this isn't worth it. So they went elsewhere. People don't want to have to wait a month for a paycheck. They want to go every 2 weeks or every week. And yeah, it's a little crazy. Since they are your own employees, you had to make sure, of their changes and everything else. Where the Giv.care, you guys take care of all of this. This has been amazing because I don't have to keep hold of, they don't have customer services. Some of these are saying, if we need to, we can reach out to you guys. You're polite, you're caring. With them, forget it. They were what you had. And our support coordinator actually helped with the quarterly summaries. So we lucked out there. We have a really great support coordinator. But she introduced us to the Giv.care, and now people can be paid when they're supposed to be paid. But that's my only comment because we did have one. And at first it was okay, but then it turned into huge bombshells. So
Yeah, thank you so much for that feedback. That is definitely something that we've noticed a lot of people have mentioned with fiscal agents. The pay has been really hard, and if they're not getting reimbursed from the state in a timely manner, then that does trickle down to the caregivers that they're paying. With Giv.care, we are able to pay every month through direct deposit. We have an amazing billing team. Shout out Sandy if you're on this call. We just have an amazing finance department that's able to kind of be pushy and fast and aggressive with DSPD, and that's helped us to get paid on time. And we're grateful that we're able to pay you guys on time as a result of that. So that is definitely a major difference. Just to read through some of the questions in the chat, a lot of people are just agreeing that the fiscal agents have been hard to get a hold of. And then Julie had said their quarterly summaries of the fiscal agent families have to submit to their support coordinator. With Giv.care, they compile those summaries. So again, less for you to do as a parent. Shailene is saying the apps are also not user-friendly. I always had to keep the packet of how-tos by my computer, so I knew how to go in and approve all the hours each month and adjust times as needed too. So yeah, that's all great feedback, and we're grateful that you guys have had such a positive experience with Giv.care. That means the world to us to see that. Jen, I'm going to pass that to you.
Yeah, just to weigh in there. One thing I did want to note is we certainly love fiscal agents. We love other providers. So when we say we want, advocates to advocate to DSPD to continue caregiver compensation through a provider model and to, organize that so that it works for the state as well as for clients and their families, we recognize that every client and their family have different needs. And so a fiscal agent may work really well for some, and a provider model may work really well for others. And we are certainly not the only providers out there. So we love to hear this feedback. This is the kind of feedback that would be so helpful to pass along to the state as you're sending these correspondences and letting them know that you've had a good experience and this is why. That will help them determine, what looks best for the clients in the state of Utah. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. We love that you love Giv, but we also know that there are amazing companies within Utah who service all sorts of clients. And so we're glad that you are having a good experience. We also know some people do enjoy fiscal agents. We don't look down on that at all.
Yeah, thanks. And just to kind of piggyback off of what Jen was saying, I think our biggest thing at Giv.care is we just want everyone to have the right to choose which option will work best for their family. And we just don't want the state or DSPD in this situation to draw a line in the sand and make that choice for you guys. And we just want everyone to be able to have free opportunity to pick what works best for them.
And did someone?
I was just going to ask if Lori still had a question or if she just didn't turn off the raise hand button.
Carol.
Go ahead, Carol.
Might be on mute, Carol.
Thank you. I thought I had it on. I just had one question on the hours that you were talking about, that fiscal agents give you more hours. I'm not sure what that's meaning other than that, do they still allow overtime? Is that why?
So I'm gonna let Anna piggyback off of me if I misspeak on something, but you will have a set amount of hours that your support coordinator gets from the state through an RFS or whenever the initial budget comes through. So if you get 30 hours a week of SL3, a fiscal agent will be able to honor all 30 of those hours. It's not necessarily an approval of overtime, but just what is in your budget. When that comes to Giv.care, because we bill the state at a higher rate, you can see a reduction in the available hours because we are using more funding than the fiscal agent is using. We are also able to provide caregivers a higher pay than a fiscal agent. So in a lot of cases, the finances tend to even out a bit. But that is kind of where the hours conversation is coming from, is that whatever you have in your budget, you'll get all of it you'll get all of those hours with the fiscal agent. With Giv.care, there can be a reduction because of the higher amount of money that we charge to the state. But I'll let a member of my team step in if they want to clarify any of that as well.
Yeah, no, that I think sums it up really well. So Carol, if you had other questions to that, but a fiscal agent as well would not let you work overtime because under caregiver compensation, you are capped at 40 hours a week. And if you're two parents, that's, 20 hours each or 30 and 10, however, that's decided to be split up between the families. So it merely comes down to that size of budget, as Paige was saying. And, as you can see and through firsthand accounts here is that it is less hours, but we're also hoping to give the parent more bandwidth and the less paperwork. If they see their paperwork as overwhelming, we like to think ours is underwhelming. And we, by still hitting all the marks and making you guys get on with your everyday lives. And Daryl, real quick, before you jump in with your question, I just wanted to circle back to the comment before with Paige and that line in the sand as far as hoping DSPD gives, options to our families here, continuing moving forward. That line in the sand from what we perceive is really comes down to tracking. And I know we've said it before on this call and we'll end with it and say it till we're blue in the face. But the main reason is that why they were with fiscal agents before is because the state perceives that that was the best way to be able to track how caregiver compensation was used for oversight and for fraud. We in our model, and I can't speak to other providers in the state, but I'm sure they have ways of going about it as well. We can track all that. We have the statistics. It's like we were to have two codes internally for us. So if SAS, the self-administrated supports through a fiscal agent, is SL1 and SL3, you're only SLN to us. Internally, you're SL1 and SL3, right? We are tracking that for you on our behalf. And that's what we can't iterate enough and say enough to the state, that we got them just as much as they got them, because we want to help them too, make their jobs easier. Daryl?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
We were with Acumen for many, many years. When we looked into Give, primarily that was because we had been told that there was a possibility that Give had signed in caregivers that wanted excess hours. And we went through a crisis with our boy, and we needed a lot of extra help really, really quickly. Give was very new, and there was no list of caregivers looking for work. That's a huge advantage, and that is in place now. And we've used that several times, as caregivers tend to come and go depending on the situation. So with a fiscal agent, we always had to find our own caregiver. That was 100% of the time. As far as the paperwork side, I would say everything is about sixes. very honestly. Acumen worked through some frustrating side of things a few years back, and they became more responsive. For us, there was a specific person assigned just for Utah. Before they did that, you had to talk to somebody on the phone in Arizona. When you called Arizona, they didn't know you, you didn't know them, they didn't know where to send you, and you went in circles. Once they got the message that they needed a dedicated Utah group and went back to that, they had that, and then they did away with it due to cost, and then they brought it back because they had a lot of complaints. The sign-up process in the beginning with Give, we actually lost 2 caregivers that we had found during this critical time because it took 3-4 weeks to get them onboarded. Partly their fault, partly the system's fault, what have you. We were onboarding people with Acumen and getting good to go within as little as 2 days at that time. And when we were scrambling hard and fast. Our boy was in a major breakdown situation, and we were using paid help and volunteer help from our neighborhood and church, and we were using a ton of people. I'm gonna say probably in total 35 people involved. The biggest thing and advantage to us right now with Give is that list. It exists. There's people on there you can call and make those contacts. But if you know and find somebody you want to use that's not been working with Give and not on the list, the onboarding has been much faster. We just picked up a gal a week ago, and she will be on the payroll and working with us tomorrow. So those things on the Give side that were frustrating have mostly been ironed out. As far as reporting with fiscal agent, maybe Acumen's an exception, but I could literally go in on any given day and see what I had used and what I had left to use. And I would track that. And as we came in toward the end of our year, our cycle, we'd look and say, oh, we've got 100 hours left to use. We typically use 25 a week. If we use 25 a week, we're going to leave 30 on the table at the end of the cycle. Let's go on a little vacation and have them work extra hours while we're gone and take over for us. And we got that dialed into where we used our allocation to within 2-3 hours of what was allocated. So that brings me to overtime really quickly. There was a process that we could get overtime approved through a fiscal agent. The one thing we did not run into with a fiscal agent is each employee was our employee. So if we were in a crisis and we were using a single employee for 40 hours, they could also go work for another client for 30 or 40 hours, and there was no overtime involved. Currently, we have people that we're using that are Give caregivers that work 20 hours for family A, 18 hours for us. And if we needed extra help of 5 hours more, it'll throw them into an overtime situation. And so that's a little bit restrictive compared to what we were used to as we controlled our own employees. Not a big deal, but there are little caveats and differences. We like Give. We do find it way easier to find employees with the higher pay. the difference is a couple dollars per hour. And that does make a difference to these people. And they tend to stay with us better. The ones that we're losing to husbands moving out of state for a different job, decisions to go back to college, those kinds of things. We're not losing people over, I can make more money somewhere else.
Thank you, Daryl. That is definitely a great perspective to add in, and we appreciate hearing your experience. And as we mentioned before, right, we are advocates that every client should have a choice. So every family should be able to choose what provider type, what fiscal agent, basically where they want to go, which route they want to take with Medicaid services. And so one thing, yep, I did want to echo for Daryl is that, yes, Give is unique in the sense that we don't allow overtime. So all caregivers are limited to 40 hours a week. If that is not something that fits, your client's needs, we definitely recommend talk with other providers, talk with fiscal agents. They may be able to offer overtime that we just don't. On the other hand, we offer some things that other providers or fiscal agents don't. And so again, right, we just want everyone to have that choice to make the decision that's best for them. And I did want to say Daryl is one of our earliest onboarders with Give. And so he has seen us from the very beginning when we were still just struggling to get set up. And so something that we're continually trying to do is innovate our processes, make them more efficient. And the end goal, right, is that we provide a system and a model that's convenient for the client, the caregivers, and the parents and guardians involved. And so we will never stop trying to reach that goal. We will always continue to do our best to make it as easy as possible, as simple as possible, and as effective as possible. So I appreciate you all jumping in there.
Perfect. Were there any other questions that anyone had? Were there any other comments that any other members of our agency team wanted to make? Thanks, Natalie. Well, if we have no more questions or comments, I'm going to close out this session of our webinar. We're just so grateful for everyone that was willing to take the time to meet with us this morning and to share your experiences. And we will follow up this webinar with that email that I was telling you about that will have the emails that you can make contact with the DSPD and our email template of like an example letter that you can send out. But again, we do encourage you to make that letter your own. And if you have questions about anything after this webinar in regards to anything that we provide at Giv.care, please feel free to email us at support@Giv.care, and we're happy and ready to help you at any time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.